how communities care for the environment. So culture is very important. Care, reflect, compassion, and share responsibility. Yes, so together they foster resilience against climate change. So culture is very important. And also there is the stewardship, the attention that we give to our environment is very important. Not only talk about environment, I mentioned even our women, talking about the youth, talking about the community, the chiefs, they all form part of our community in terms of bringing very, very responsible. So the environmental care is both culture and environment, obviously, as already mentioned. So economic empowerment, this was like two slides ago. Economic empowerment through sustainability. How can we ensure economic empowerment through sustainability? One is environmental stewardship, which obviously can create green jobs and inclusive growth. And we have renewable energy enterprises, ecotourism and cultural heritage sites, sustainability, and also ensure environmental protection. So challenges, what are the challenges in ensuring cultural diversity, in promoting and sustaining our environment, especially in Africa? Modernization pressure, obviously, is one of them. Weak environmental policies, loss of traditional knowledge. All these hampers our quest in ensuring environmental sustainability. Okay, so we can the modernization is not about road, but then the adverse effect. How can we really manage modernization? Making sure that we do not let modernization overcome our culture, overcome or take charge, of our belief system as Africans. The challenge is weak environmental. We don't have an implementable environmental policies in Africa. Lack of political will in ensuring that yes, we have strong environmental policies. So when it comes to Ghana, the illegal mining and everything, there's a whole lot of big debates turning into politics. What's the role of the government? What's the role of the CSOs? What's the role of individuals in ensuring that the policies, not that we don't have the policies, not that we don't have the laws we have, but then the implementation, the will, the power. What Kwame is doing in an entirety is one of the ways that the CSOs, the individuals, and the institutions have also helped in championing environmental sustainability, the education, and then we have the loss of traditional knowledge. The current age, the youth of today, they don't know anything about our culture. The infiltration of modernization has depleted our culture from our traditional knowledge, which is a challenge. So we have the opportunity to integrate indigenous knowledge into policy. So everything, our culture, whatever, our knowledge, traditional knowledge, we have to incorporate all of them into a policy. Drive it in our educational system and the curriculum, whatever. It should be what we call an upheaval, a campaign, an aggressive one, youth and women engagement. Women are the powerful force in our community. Women constitute the greater capacity when we're able to empower them, to manage the environment. When woman is in the house and well versed in environmental sustainability, climate change management, she will be able to educate the children, the husband, everybody, the household, both internal and external family, in respecting the environment. In terms of the youth as well, I've already said, green innovation at the World Bank is also there. Every single there should be a policy drive where CSOs, NGOs, whatever, the government, we all campaign, we speak about it, that everybody let them green, like plant trees, the use of AI, as my sister rightly mentioned, to ensure green innovation across every city, every community, all institutions should be green. The use of technological advancements, that a lot of us technically believe that Africa can build a resilient, empowered, and sustainable future. In conclusion, I'll say that our culture teaches care. Okay, and through care, we secure our planet and our future. Okay, so we should show care, concern towards our environment to secure our future. And then Africa's path sustainability lies in merging its cultural wisdom with modern environmental practices. Organizations with AI is good, everything is good, but we have to merge it with the African wisdom, the African culture, and everything, okay, to ensure that yes. So we have this Mentors Foundation Ghana, Mentors Foundation Ghana Prisons Inmates Agri Project. We are doing this agri project, you know, to ensure environmental sustainability, empowering female prison inmates across the country. And this one prison inmates, okay, some of the agricultural projects we are doing in partnering with Ghana Prison Service. And now we have Fidelity Bank, we have MTN Ghana all coming on board to ensure that yes, we empower the women, we train our women, whether they are in prison, whether they are in the communities, whatever, we trace wherever every woman is, okay, to empower them, okay, and they shoot in jail. So these are some of the things we're doing. There's aquaculture, fish pond, and stuff here. This also planted in cucumber, various fruits, various vegetables. We have the agri, we have what we call maize farm and other things there. So when you go to the southern prisons, you see all of them area about. Next year we have a project called Youth in Agribusiness across Africa. So let's watch out. And then I mean with this we believe that we can ensure sustainable environment in Africa by showing care, stewardship, and then blending with our cultural diversity, the uniqueness of our culture in Africa. We can do that in sustaining the environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Can we show some appreciation to Bernard? That's a very good presentation. Thank you so much, Bernard. We appreciate that. I can smell the food, but I don't seem to see the food. You know, I like to take advantage whenever I can. So the food is, I can smell it, but it's not here. So whilst we're waiting for the food, well, why don't we take the last presentation and then we know that we are done with all the virtual presentations. How about that? In the next 15 minutes, I hope by that time the food should be here because some of us are starving. I want to make sure that we are eating. So we will go straight into our last virtual presentation for the day, and then we will, our good friend Mandis is going to do the presentation for us, and Mandis, correct me if I'm mistaken, he's presenting all the way from the United Kingdom.
That's correct, yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the EELL for inviting me to present today. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
And is it moving? Yeah. Are the slides moving?
Yes, correct.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll be looking at reclaiming narrative sovereignty in the age of green revolutions. The original presentation is around 25 minutes, so I will skip some sections. So really, this will be a critique of the green revolution myth that frames hunger as a problem of production rather than one of power. So we've got it into three sections, and the first one is looking at this trap, this fallacy that we're not producing enough food, and it's an issue, it's a technical problem rather than social and environmental injustice caused by colonialism and capital accumulation. The second one is the cycle that reproduces this dependency on inputs and a modern farming system that results in indigenous people losing access to their land, as well as the degradation of that land and their sovereignty. And then finally, we'll look at narrative sovereignty through food sovereignty and indigenous cosmologies, how we can move from the spectrum of production and consumption injustices and expand from the right to land to the right of land to its people. Okay, so starting off with the trap, this is our man Sisyphus, who betrayed and was deceitful of the gods, and he was banished to the underworld, obliged to roll a rock up a hill only for it to roll back down and repeat that process. We can envisage or depict this cycle as our struggle to break free from hunger. The English economist Malthus, pre-industrial economist, warned that population grows faster than food supply. So in other words, we're trapped in this equilibrium, that any time we increase or have a surplus of resources or food production, it gets consumed, and that can result in a collapse of living standards or indeed civilizations. Both the Sisyphus and Malthusian trap reveal a deeper truth, and that is our pursuit of mastery through technology. Over nature creates new limits, and when we look at the Industrial Revolution, which gave us the lure or the promise of escaping this trap through productivity and innovation, we still see that Sisyphean struggle against hunger and the ecological collapse endures. Again, in the interest of time, I won't dwell too much on the history from colonial plantations, as I think that's well understood in terms of history. What I will draw to your attention is that the impact of colonial farming systems, which were accentuated by the Industrial Revolution, affected both people enslaved in the New World, but also the displaced peasants. So in the UK, people were displaced on their land in the process of enclosure or privatization of land. And although sugarcane was initially planted to feed sort of the luxury demand, it eventually became a cheap source of energy to feed factory workers. And although slavery was legally abandoned by the late 19th century, it said its roots were set in our notion of global capitalism. By the end of the First World War, we see the foundations of the Green Revolution, with the US producing fertilizers, mechanization, and it was in the 1940s that the first Green Revolution. So when we talk about the Green Revolution, ultimately there are three things involved. One is a hybrid seed, which is in effect a patented seed that belongs to a company, combined with heavy mechanization and farm inputs, which include irrigation, fertilizer, and chemical use. And that model was pushed on Mexico by the Rockefeller Foundation with the support of the US government as an experiment with these modern practices. And that package, that scientific package of hybrid seed, mechanization and farm inputs displaced traditional seed technologies and knowledges. Fast forward into the North American Free Trade Association, where the drive for increased productivity created a free market. And although maize and bean were staple crops of Mexicans, were off the table for I think about 18 years, when they were included in the Free Trade Association, it resulted in the displacement of millions of rural people. Now, those findings weren't abandoned. The Rockefeller Foundation had learned from its experience and applied that to India. So India proved fertile grounds to address the concerns of overpopulation and poverty. This time the foundation tried to take on board smallholder concerns and adopted a scale-neutral solution. However, in reality, hybrid seed requires heavy inputs, so it wasn't resource neutral. So it relies heavily on costly inputs, often bundled up as a package with other technical inputs, which favour commercial farms over smallholders. And what we see with smallholders is the worst of both worlds, because one, they're on marginal land, which won't benefit the full potential of a hybrid seed, and second, with their limited ability to invest in inputs, that they can't offer the full suite of inputs required to get the benefit. So that generated a yield gap between trials undertaken on prime agricultural land versus the smallholder experience on marginal land. And then the other question is who actually owns the seed. So the millennia practice of collecting and storing seed, the best seed for planting the following year, is broken, with property rights now being assigned to seed companies. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of food security? So those kind of mechanisms and instruments used are what we now know as modern agriculture. And those tools and instruments are actually influenced in the international institutions that we rely on. So the UN Sustainable Development Goal to end hunger, the second UN SDG. But if you look at the UN definition of food security, it is defined as existing when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Now, that sounds nice, but that three-pillar definition of food security is actually based on the libertarian principle of availability, access, and stability. Why does this matter today? It's because we're hearing the same narrative. There is a significant population growth forecast in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and the advocates of another or a new green revolution are again looking at modernity to try and stay ahead of this trap, this race to outpace population by producing more food. So the current rhetoric that has been used, or is being used for the same scientific discourse to feed the growing population is assuming that the Green Revolution was a success in the first place. But the question we've got to ask ourselves is, if food is a life-sustaining need, why isn't it treated as a public good? In other words, inclusive and non-rivalrous, as opposed to food security being left at the mercy of market forces. So let us take a quick look at how food security under market forces is shaping up. This takes us back to Mexico. As I said, millions of Mexicans displaced because of the North American Free Trade Act. These are the same migrants that fled to America that are now being demonized by the Trump administration. The Obama administration promoted biofuel, in other words, growing crops or energy. That pushed maize prices up. Maize being a staple in Mexico, the government had to step in due to riots over maize prices. More recently, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw how much lack of resilience there was in our long and global food supply chains. So what we're seeing is those international food supply chains are actually, they lack resistance to systemic shocks, whether that's the COVID pandemic or the war in Ukraine. In terms of the African continent, which relies heavily on Russia in terms of grain and other inputs such as fertilizer. Again, the war in Ukraine highlighted the lack of resilience and the lack of availability and price hikes caused by the war. In addition, with price rises, the potential of African nations adopting a protectionist approach and placing trade barriers between African nations can be another cause of price inflation. And then also government policy can change at a whim, and again the Trump resulting in shockwaves for a lot of people relying on food aid support. And then that food security model isn't just about impacting the global south. If you look at the global north, we look at American food deserts because retailers do not want to invest opening stores in poor neighborhoods, and likewise indigenous peoples are more adversely affected by price rises, especially in the northern provinces of Canada, where the cost of delivering food or distributing food is higher. You could argue, okay, those are supply chain issues. We can argue the case that, okay, those can be addressed through market intervention, but ultimately the Green Revolution and modern agriculture gives us cheap food. And yes, at the point of purchase, it may appear cheap, but the reality is we're paying for that food in terms of our health and our taxes. So just to put this into perspective, globally, food production is valued at 9 trillion. Once you add all the externalities, environmental degradation, impacts on the quality of our lives and livelihoods, and economic losses, the true cost of food, which we're paying, just not at the point of purchase, but the true cost of food is on average 3 times what we're paying. That's a reality. In addition, modern agriculture is the biggest user of extracted water. It's the biggest cause of biodiversity loss. It is one of the biggest causes of agricultural pollution, so also pollution, and it's one of the biggest. And again, those that advocate expanding agricultural land for productivity, there's the opportunity to at least first address soil degradation and restore land that has lost its fertility, and also address food loss and waste, where 1/3 of the food we produce goes to waste. So, based on that model, it is how secure is food under this market force or liberal forces, and what we've seen is how power dynamics and social and environmental injustices focused on technological centered solutions are raised by vertically grading alternatives. Modern farming is extractive and causes loss of natural capital. And we've also seen a lack of resilience with these long supply chains. And so where do we go from here? Reclamation, let's look at how we can move away from this. So again, if the assumption is, or the hypothesis is that food security brought about by modern agriculture and the Green Revolution is a success, you may argue there's a limited success if you look at the aggregate supply of food or grain that's produced. However, those increased yields, in the case studies of Mexico and India, are undermined when you start looking at the yield gap, because optimum conditions are not often materialized, and it also masks how capital accumulation actually deepens food insecurity by dispossessing farmers of their land and knowledges. And globally, people without adequate lands or income still remain ill-fed, and the lack of access to land or income continues to leave people undernourished. So as a counter movement, the notion of food sovereignty was born, and that is where it converts to food security. Food sovereignty talks about the right to food and to produce food, which means that all people have the right to safe, nutritious and culturally appropriate food and to food producing resources. Now, where do we go with this? Now, the problem is, if we look at food sovereignty, we end up just aggregating our situation. So there's an opportunity to expand and look at indigenous cosmologies. So what we're doing here is where a colonial cosmology sees LACET, indigenous cosmologies see that as a relation. It's a kin, it's an ancestor, it's a teacher. So that's just the Native American quote. So if we aggregate the situation of food production, we conceal the injustices of modern agriculture. And that's why looking at the experience of First Peoples, we see that resistance to colonization predates the resistance to industrial agriculture. And that situates food sovereignty within a broad anti-colonial struggle. So we're not just talking about production and consumption issues. It's not one of a technicality, but it becomes a broader issue of our anti-colonial struggle. Archimedes said, "Give me a place to stand and I shall move the earth." And it's the same here. If we can take a long enough time view, we predate modernity and we can approach or embrace the indigenous cosmologies into our resistance. And that's where storytelling comes in, and it allows us to reframe the struggle of food sovereignty not only as the right to land for people, but the right of land to its people. Quickly, just to look at some case studies, the Zapatista movement in Mexico, they were the ones that kind of coined the notion of a pluriverse, but it was also the Zapatistas and other peasant movements within Mexico that led to biodiversity legislation in Mexico that prevented the Monsantos and other big ag companies from promoting genetic modified maize in the country on the grounds of their threat to maize biodiversity, maize being a crop that originated in Mexico. The Maoris, the indigenous people of New Zealand, see water as a living entity, as an indivisible whole, and New Zealand in 2017 granted the Whanganui River the equivalent of human rights. So it's the first time human rights or rights of a living entity have been granted to a river. The Standing Rock movement, so again, indigenous nations, people, the Sioux tribe, again, campaigns effectively turn it into an international resistance against oil pipelines over their land and potential pollution to G, and that was a kind of a peasant and indigenous movement which combined cosmological principles with three notions of a transnational political and social movement, a scientific discipline, and the study of agro-ecosystems, and that now is being adopted or being embraced by modern agriculture as modern farming tries to embrace sustainable farming systems. So what we're seeing is that the New Green Revolution will revisit and provide novel challenges and argue that another green revolution is required, and it's manifested in the form of land grabbing, further property rights. You may even hear arguments about population control in the name of food and nutritional security. And it may go through many reiterations, but ultimately modern agriculture is still a function of a capitalist system. And having an appreciation of capital accumulation and production and consumption patterns allows us to understand how we're bound by colonized and colonizing nations. So ultimately what we've got to do, we've got to really how we know, how we grow and live with the land. And indigenous case studies the examples that I gave are tied to a common principle that land, we've got a relational balance with the land. It's not shouldn't be seen as a resource. And ultimately, if we're to change the food system, we need to change the narrative, we need to change the story. So armed with that historical perspective, it allows us to identify patterns and predict the new trajectory of food security and narratives and storytelling, but ultimately it's that counter storytelling based on indigenous cosmologies that will allow us to see our way out of this. I think that's it from my side, just references.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Can we show Amanda some appreciation of love? I know it's been a long day, but thank you so much for sharing that. All right, great, awesome. All right, so to that point, I keep pushing the lunch back. My understanding is that it's an outside lunch, so they are almost just here. But because it's past, it's almost 1, I will say that let's take a 15 minutes break. It's important to have that flexibility to stretch and all that. My understanding is that it's going to be a working lunch, so the lunch is packed. So we'll be eating while the other presentation is going on. But at this point, let's take a 15 minutes, if that's okay with all of you. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.